Listen with every fiber of your being, because what Rudolf Steiner revealed about the cycle of life will shatter the comfortable illusion most people live under, the carefully constructed lie that modern materialism has convinced you to accept as truth, that you began when you were born and will end when you die, that this one lifetime is all there is, that you're a random accident of biology living a single brief span between two voids of non-existence. Steiner, with his trained clairvoyant perception developed through decades of rigorous spiritual practice, saw directly into the spiritual dimensions invisible to ordinary sight, and declared with absolute certainty, backed by detailed observation and systematic spiritual scientific methodology, that what we call birth is not a beginning but a continuation, that the soul entering the newborn body brings with it entire histories of previous existences, accumulated experiences across centuries or millennia, karma built from countless choices made in previous incarnations, relationships that stretch back through multiple lifetimes, creating invisible threads that draw you to specific people and situations in this current existence. You didn't start as blank slate, despite what conventional psychology claims, but arrived in this body carrying invisible baggage that shapes everything about who you are and what you experience. Those talents that seem to appear from nowhere, the child prodigy playing piano at age 4, the mathematical genius solving complex equations before formal education, these aren't genetic accidents or neurological quirks, but are skills painstakingly developed across previous lifetimes, carried forward in the soul's memory even though the new brain has no conscious recollection of that development. Those inexplicable fears that therapy can't trace to any childhood trauma, phobias so intense they paralyze you despite having no apparent cause in this life, these are often traumas from previous deaths, the soul remembering drowning or burning or falling, even though this body never experienced those deaths. Those instant connections with certain people, where you meet someone and feel like you've known them forever, or conversely, those inexplicable antipathies where you dislike someone on sight for no rational reason. These are karmic recognitions, the soul remembering relationships from before, either positive bonds to be continued or conflicts to be resolved. Your life circumstances, the family you were born into with its specific dynamics and challenges, the body you inhabit with its particular strengths and limitations, the historical period and geographical location of your birth, the socioeconomic conditions you started with. Absolutely none of this is random accident or cosmic injustice, but is precisely calibrated curriculum your soul chose before incarnating, working with spiritual beings in the world between lives to design the optimal conditions for addressing specific developmental needs carried forward from your last existence. The research that comes closest to validating this from Western science is the work of psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, who spent 40 years documenting over 3,000 cases of children with verifiable past life memories, many of whom could describe specific details about previous lives, including names, locations, and causes of death that were later confirmed through historical investigation. Studies on child prodigies show capacities that cannot be explained by genetics or environment alone, suggesting knowledge carried forward from previous development. Research on near-death experiences by researchers like Raymond Moody and Pim van Lommel has documented consciousness continuing during periods when brain activity has ceased, providing evidence that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but uses the brain as instrument. But Steiner's understanding goes far beyond these fragmentary scientific glimpses into the systematic mapping of how reincarnation actually works, the precise mechanisms by which the soul moves from one life to another, carrying forward both achievements and debts, both developed capacities and unlearned lessons. He taught that between each incarnation, you spend extended periods in spiritual realms, reviewing the life just lived, working through its karmic consequences, preparing meticulously for the next embodiment, and that this preparation is not passive waiting, but intensive spiritual work that shapes everything about who you'll be and what you'll experience in your next life. Every birth is return, every death is departure, and the real you, the eternal spiritual individuality that Steiner called the I, continues across this vast cycle of incarnations, slowly evolving toward a goal that most people don't even suspect exists: the full conscious development of spiritual capacities that will allow humanity to participate deliberately in the ongoing creation and evolution of cosmos itself, rather than remaining unconscious passengers in a process we don't understand. Now we descend into perhaps the most shocking and most transformative truth that Steiner revealed about what happens before you're born. In that period between death and rebirth, that he mapped with the precision of a spiritual cartographer, documenting the stages and processes with the same systematic rigor that a scientist brings to physical research. In the spiritual worlds between incarnations, after you've worked through the purgatorial cleansing of your last life's attachments and desires, after you've spent time in the heavenly realms harvesting the spiritual fruits of your previous existence, your soul, working in collaboration with higher beings that Steiner called the hierarchies, angels and archangels, and even higher orders of spiritual beings, begins the complex process of preparing for your next incarnation. And this preparation involves choices, deliberate selections made with full awareness, though that awareness will be forgotten once you incarnate, creating the illusion that everything that happens to you is either random chance or imposed by external forces beyond your control. The process begins with karmic assessment, a comprehensive review of what you accomplished in previous lives, what you failed to accomplish, what harm you caused that needs balancing, what relationships you formed that need continuation or resolution, what capacities you developed that can be built upon, what lessons you avoided that must be faced again. This isn't judgment imposed by external authority, no angry God condemning you, but is your own higher self, your eternal I, looking with absolute honesty at what needs to happen next for your continued evolution. Based on this assessment, you survey the upcoming opportunities for incarnation, looking at which families will be producing children around the time when conditions will be optimal for your development, considering the genetic inheritance different parent combinations would provide, evaluating the cultural and historical circumstances of different time periods and geographical locations, and making selections that to your current earthly consciousness would seem insane, choosing difficulty over ease, challenge over comfort, because your soul knows that growth happens through resistance, through limitation, through facing exactly what you least want to face. You select your parents not randomly, not because you happen to be assigned to them by cosmic bureaucracy, but because they will provide exactly the genetic inheritance, family dynamics, early environment, and karmic relationships necessary for your soul's development in this particular lifetime. That difficult parent who made your childhood miserable, you chose them before birth, knowing that working through that relationship would address specific karmic debts or develop specific capacities essential for your evolution. That family system that seemed so dysfunctional, you selected it precisely because those dysfunctions would force you to develop strengths and awareness you needed. The body you inhabit was chosen for its specific limitations and gifts because certain lessons can only be learned through certain physical conditions. A soul needing to develop humility might choose a body that will face chronic illness or disability. A soul needing to develop compassion might choose circumstances of poverty or oppression. A soul that has been overly intellectual in previous lives might choose a body with learning disabilities that force development of other capacities. Your gender in this life was deliberate choice because masculine and feminine incarnations provide different experiences and develop different aspects of the soul, and over the course of many lifetimes, you'll incarnate in both forms, experiencing life from all perspectives. Your race, your ethnicity, your cultural background, these too are chosen because souls need to experience existence from every possible human vantage point to develop complete empathy and understanding. Your historical period was selected because certain lessons can only be learned in certain eras, certain karma can only be worked out when specific cultural and technological conditions exist. Even the astrological moment of your birth, what Steiner called your birth horoscope, was carefully chosen because the configuration of planets at the moment of incarnation creates a template, an energetic imprint that shapes your temperament and the general trajectory of your life's possibilities, not determining what will happen, but establishing the field of potential within which your free will operates. Research on adoption and twin studies provides some scientific support for this understanding. Studies of twins separated at birth show remarkable similarities in life choices despite different environments, suggesting something beyond genetics and environment is operating. Research on adopted children often shows stronger affinity for biological parents they never met than for adoptive parents who raised them, suggesting soul-level connections that transcend physical contact. Studies on birth order effects, while usually interpreted through psychological frameworks, can also be seen as souls choosing specific positions in family constellation for specific developmental purposes. The phenomenon of walk-ins, documented in spiritual literature, though not accepted by mainstream science, where one soul exits a body and another enters, usually during trauma or near-death experience, points to the reality that souls can and do make choices about embodiment that transcend conventional understanding. But the planning goes even deeper than selecting circumstances. Steiner taught that before birth, you make specific agreements with other souls about meeting at particular times in your upcoming life, because certain growth only happens through certain relationships, certain karma only resolves through specific encounters. You arrange with a soul that will become your spouse to meet at age 25 at a specific cafe, though neither of you will consciously remember making that arrangement. You agree with someone who will become your business partner to cross paths at a particular conference. You plan with a soul that owes you karmic debt to enter your life at a moment when that debt can be repaid through the help they'll provide. You schedule conflicts with souls you wronged in previous lives so those relationships can be balanced and transformed. Every significant relationship in your life was mapped out in the spiritual worlds before you were born, creating a complex choreography where free will and destiny dance together, where you're simultaneously choosing your experiences and living out plans you made before birth but have completely forgotten. Now Steiner reveals the precise architecture of how a single lifetime unfolds, the developmental stages that every human passes through as the soul progressively incarnates more fully into the physical body. And this understanding is revolutionary because it shows that childhood is not just preparation for adult life, but is actual spiritual process of incarnation, the gradual descent of the eternal I into the temporary vehicle of body and personality. The pattern follows 7-year cycles, each governed by different spiritual forces, each building specific capacities, each representing a distinct phase in the soul's incarnation process. And understanding these cycles allows you to see your own development and your children's development with completely different eyes, recognizing that what appears as behavioral problems or developmental delays may actually be the soul struggling with the incarnation process, needing support rather than punishment, needing understanding of spiritual dimensions rather than just psychological or medical intervention. Birth to age 7 is dominated by physical development, the period when the etheric body, what Steiner called the life body that organizes and vitalizes physical matter, is completely engaged in building and shaping the physical form, creating the foundation of health or illness that will persist throughout the entire lifetime. During these first 7 years, the child learns primarily through imitation, unconsciously absorbing and copying everything in the environment, which is why the quality of what surrounds the young child is so crucial, why harsh words or violence or dishonesty in the home create imprints that last a lifetime, and why Steiner insisted that the most important educational principle for this age is providing worthy models to imitate rather than abstract instruction or premature intellectual development. The child at this stage is not yet fully incarnated, still has 1 foot in the spiritual worlds they recently left, which is why young children often see spiritual beings or have memories of "before I was born" that adults dismiss as imagination, but which are actually genuine spiritual perceptions that fade as incarnation completes. At age 7, a dramatic shift occurs that traditional cultures recognized through initiation rituals, but which modern culture mostly ignores. The etheric body completes its work of building the physical foundation and liberates itself for new functions, which is why the child suddenly becomes capable of learning in completely different ways. Why starting formal education before age 7, as Steiner warned and as Waldorf education respects, actually damages the child by pulling etheric forces away from their proper work of completing physical development. From 7 to 14, imagination awakens, memory develops, not just as rote repetition, but as living capacity to hold and work with images. The child begins to learn through pictorial thinking rather than just imitation. And this is the age when fairy tales and myths and artistic activities are not just entertainment, but are actually essential nutrition for the developing soul, providing images and archetypes that shape moral and emotional development in ways that abstract rules or direct instruction never could. At age 14, another major transition occurs as puberty arrives with its hormonal storms and emotional turbulence. And Steiner revealed that this physical maturation corresponds to the birth of the astral body, the soul body that is the vehicle for thinking, feeling, and willing in their fully human form. The teenager suddenly becomes capable of abstract thinking, can understand concepts independent of sensory experience, begins to form independent judgments rather than just accepting adult authority, and experiences the awakening of sexual feelings that are not just biological drives, but are actually manifestations of spiritual forces seeking expression through physical forms. The emotional intensity and identity crisis characteristic of adolescence are not pathology, but are the soul struggling to integrate this newly active astral body with the physical and etheric bodies, trying to figure out who they are as an individual separate from parents and cultural conditioning. And the guidance teenagers need is not control or restriction, but understanding and support for this spiritual emergence. At age 21, the true I, the eternal spiritual individuality, is finally born into the 3 bodies it will use as instruments. And this is why 21 has traditionally been recognized as age of majority, the point when the person becomes legally and spiritually responsible for their own choices. From 21 to 28, what Steiner called the sentient soul develops, the capacity to truly experience yourself as separate individual, to feel your own feelings rather than just reacting to others, to form intimate relationships based on genuine recognition of another rather than projection or need, to begin making autonomous choices about career and life direction rather than just following parental expectations or cultural scripts. This is the time of establishing adult identity, of learning who you are through engagement with world and others, of discovering your particular passions and talents and way of being. From 28 to 35, the intellectual soul dominates, the period when career typically establishes, when rational thinking matures into its full power, when worldly achievements and material success become primary focus, when you're building the external structure of your adult life through work and relationships and perhaps creating family of your own. This is the period when most people are most identified with their worldly roles, most engaged with material reality, most focused on building security and status and accomplishment in external terms. 35 to 42, the consciousness soul emerges, bringing with it deeper questions about meaning and purpose, dissatisfaction with mere success or material comfort, often the beginning of genuine spiritual seeking, or at least questioning of the values and goals that dominated the previous period, recognition that there must be more to existence than just working and consuming and dying, awakening to dimensions of life that youth's focus on physical and social development had obscured. At age 42, Steiner taught, a profound shift occurs that most people don't recognize or understand, mistaking it for simple aging or midlife crisis, when actually it represents the most significant spiritual transition point of the entire lifetime. The moment when everything inverts, when the forces that have been building you up begin to decline, but simultaneously, spiritual forces that have been dormant begin to awaken, creating the possibility for genuine spiritual development that wasn't available during youth's outward focus. This is why Steiner divided human life into two major arcs. The ascending arc from birth to 42, when physical and mental capacities are growing, life force is strong, you're focused on engaging with world and establishing yourself in it. And the descending arc from 42 to death, when physical vitality declines, mental sharpness may diminish, but spiritual capacities that were latent can now flower if you do the inner work necessary to develop them. If you shift your orientation from outward achievement to inward deepening, from building external structures to harvesting spiritual fruits from the experiences you've accumulated. The midlife crisis, understood spiritually rather than just psychologically, is the soul's rebellion against continuing in patterns that no longer serve. The awakening to recognition that you've been living for ego goals, for social approval, for material security, for purposes that increasingly feel empty. And this rebellion creates crisis because the entire structure of your identity and life has been built on these now questioned foundations. Depression, anxiety, radical life changes, affairs, career shifts, spiritual seeking, all the phenomena that characterize this period are not pathology, but are symptoms of soul trying to break free from purely earthly orientation and remember its spiritual nature and purpose, trying to redirect the remaining decades toward what actually matters, rather than continuing to pursue what society says should matter, but which your deepening awareness recognizes as ultimately meaningless. The physical changes of this period, the decline in energy and vigor, the appearance of aging, the body's increasing limitations, these are not just deterioration, but are actually serving spiritual purpose, forcing you to recognize that you are not your body, that identifying with physical form is identification with something temporary and dying, that if you want to find something that doesn't decay, you must look beyond the physical to the eternal spiritual self. Memory of facts and details begins to fade, but this creates space for wisdom, for seeing patterns rather than just accumulating data, for understanding meaning rather than just retaining information. The brain's processing speed slows, but this can deepen reflection, create patience, develop capacity for contemplation that youth's quick reactions and constant activity prevented. Research on adult development by psychologists like Erik Erikson and later researchers building on his work recognize that midlife involves crisis of generativity versus stagnation. The question of whether your life is contributing something meaningful that will outlast you, or whether you're just consuming resources and occupying space. Studies on meaning-making in the second half of life by researchers like William Bridges show that this period requires letting go of identities and achievements that defined you, going through what he calls neutral zone of confusion and disorientation, before emerging into new sense of purpose aligned with deeper values. Research on wisdom, particularly work by Paul Baltes and others, shows that wisdom, defined as expert knowledge about the meaning and conduct of life, typically doesn't develop until midlife or later, requires accumulation of diverse experiences and reflection on those experiences, and is associated with characteristics like tolerance of ambiguity, awareness of life's complexities, and concern for collective rather than just individual good. Steiner taught that the forces you should cultivate in the second half of life are completely different from those that served in the first half. Youth's necessary focus on ego development, on establishing yourself as separate individual, on achieving and acquiring and building, must give way to mature focus on dissolution of ego, on recognizing connection rather than separation, on giving rather than getting, on being rather than doing, on preparing for death, not as tragedy, but as transition to next phase of existence. The capacities that can develop after 42, if you orient toward them, include genuine compassion born from having suffered and survived, wisdom earned through mistakes and their consequences, equanimity developed through experiencing life's ups and downs and recognizing their temporary nature, moral intuition arising from direct spiritual perception rather than following rules, and most importantly, the beginning of conscious clairvoyance, the awakening of spiritual organs of perception that allow you to see beyond physical appearances into the spiritual realities underlying material existence. But this development is not automatic. It doesn't happen just because you get older. In fact, most people in modern Western culture never make this transition, remain identified with youth's values and goals, desperately trying to maintain physical appearance and capabilities, seeking continued achievement and acquisition, treating aging as enemy to be fought rather than as invitation to transform. And they arrive at death, having accumulated experiences, but not having transformed those experiences into wisdom, having lived many years, but not having developed spiritually, and they carry this failure forward into their next incarnation as unfinished business, lessons still unlearned, capacities still undeveloped. The opportunity of the second half of life is immense, but requires complete reorientation of values and priorities, requires accepting that you're in autumn season moving toward winter, that it's time to harvest rather than plant, to deepen rather than expand, to prepare for the great transition that awaits rather than pretending it's not coming. And this acceptance, far from being depressing, can bring profound peace and meaning that youth's frantic activity never provided. Now we approach what terrifies most people more than anything else, the great unknown that hangs over every life like inevitable shadow. And Steiner's revelation here is both more detailed and more reassuring than any religious doctrine or materialist dismissal. Death is not ending, but is precise transition, a process with definite stages that the soul passes through. And understanding these stages removes much of death's terror while also showing why how you live determines what you experience when you die. When the physical body ceases functioning, when the heart stops and breathing ends and the brain goes dark, you, the consciousness that was using that body as instrument, don't suddenly blink out of existence, but separates from the corpse in a process that takes approximately 3 days, which is why traditional cultures instinctively knew not to bury or cremate the body immediately, why they held wakes and vigils, sensing that something was still occurring even though physical life had ended. In those first 3 days after clinical death, the etheric body, the life body that organized and vitalized your physical form throughout your entire lifetime, separates from the now lifeless physical matter, and in separating it, expands, releases, creating what Steiner described and what near-death researchers like Raymond Moody have documented independently: the life review, the panoramic experience, where your entire existence from birth to death appears before you in a vast tableau, not as sequential narrative, but as simultaneous whole, every moment, every choice, every relationship, every experience available at once, in a way that's impossible during ordinary consciousness, but which becomes natural when you're freed from the brain's sequential processing. This review is not passive watching, but is active comprehension. You see not just what happened, but why it happened. Not just what you did, but what the consequences were. Not just your perspective, but the perspectives of everyone you affected. Feeling how your actions impacted others. Understanding the karmic threads you created that will need to be addressed in future lives. This life review is not judgment imposed by external authority, no angry God condemning you or benevolent deity excusing you, but is your own soul confronting the truth of how you lived, seeing with absolute clarity where you acted from love and where from fear, where you grew and where you remained stuck, what you contributed and what you consumed, who you helped and who you harmed. And this seeing is itself the beginning of karmic reckoning, because you cannot unsee what you've seen, cannot unknow what you've understood, and this knowledge will shape everything about your journey through the spiritual worlds and your eventual return in a new incarnation. The quality and completeness of this life review depends significantly on how conscious you were during life, whether you practiced self-reflection and self-awareness, or lived mechanically, whether you faced truth about yourself or maintained elaborate self-deceptions. And this is one reason why spiritual practice during life is so important, because it develops the capacity for honest self-perception that determines what you can extract from the life review. Research on near-death experiences provides some scientific validation of what Steiner described through spiritual perception. Studies by Kenneth Ring, Bruce Grayson, Pim Van Lommel, and others have documented thousands of cases where people who were clinically dead with no measurable brain activity reported detailed awareness of what occurred during that period, including accurate observations of resuscitation efforts, conversations among medical staff, even events in locations far from their body, all of which suggests consciousness continues and can perceive when the physical brain is not functioning. Many of these accounts include the life review experience described with remarkable consistency across different cultures, seeing your entire life, feeling the emotions of people you affected, understanding your existence from a higher perspective, and this consistency across independent reports from people who had no contact with each other or exposure to esoteric teachings about death suggests they're describing an actual phenomenon rather than brain-generated hallucination. After approximately 3 days, the etheric body completes its separation and dissolves back into the cosmic etheric realm, and you enter what Steiner called Kamaloka, a term borrowed from Eastern teachings, but describing precisely observed spiritual reality. Kamaloka is purgatorial realm, not eternal hell, but temporary state where you work through and purge the attachments, desires, and habitual patterns that bound you to physical existence. Here you experience what Steiner called life in reverse, reliving your just completed existence backward from death to birth, but experiencing it from the opposite perspective, feeling not what you felt, but what others felt because of your actions, experiencing the pain you caused, the joy you brought, the consequences of every choice, but from the receiving end rather than the acting end. This is not punishment, but is education, the soul learning through direct experience why certain actions are harmful and others beneficial, developing empathy and moral understanding that couldn't be developed through intellectual teaching alone. The duration of this Kamaloka period, Steiner observed, is typically about 1/3 the length of your earthly life. So if you lived 75 years, you spend roughly 25 years in Kamaloka working through that life's karmic residue. The intensity and difficulty of this period depend on how you lived. If you were primarily selfish, caused much harm, lived in denial of consequences, Kamaloka will be intensely painful as you experience all the suffering you caused. If you lived with awareness and compassion, tried to minimize harm, faced yourself honestly, Kamaloka will be relatively mild. The purification quick, because there's less that needs purging. This is why moral and spiritual development during earthly life is so important. Not because some external authority will punish you, but because you will experience the natural consequences of how you lived, will reap what you sowed, will understand through direct experience what your choices meant. And this understanding becomes part of your soul's permanent development, wisdom that you carry forward into future existences. After the purgation of Kamaloka is complete, after you've worked through the desires and attachments and patterns that bound you to physical existence, after you've experienced from every perspective the consequences of how you lived, you ascend into what Steiner called Devachan, the heavenly realm known in Christian tradition as heaven, and in Eastern teachings as the Devachanic world, but neither the simplistic, eternal rest of popular religion, nor the exotic paradise of mythological imagination, rather a state of pure spiritual consciousness where you exist in your essential soul nature, freed from physical limitations and emotional turbulence, working actively with spiritual beings to prepare for your next incarnation. This is not passive waiting, not eternal vacation, but is intensive spiritual work, though work that feels joyful rather than burdensome because you're operating in your natural element, consciousness engaging directly with other consciousness without the friction and resistance that physical matter creates. In Devachan, you review what you learned in the life just completed, extracting the spiritual essence from all your experiences, transforming accumulated moments into permanent wisdom, integrating insights and capacities developed through struggles and relationships and challenges, storing all of this in your eternal I as development that you'll carry forward into future incarnations. You work with the hierarchies, the spiritual beings that Steiner described in precise detail, angels who guide individual human development, archangels who oversee cultural and national evolution, archai who govern entire epochs of history, and even higher beings beyond these, collaborating with them to understand your karmic situation, to see what debts you created that must be balanced, what relationships you formed that need continuation or resolution, what capacities you developed that can be built upon, what lessons you avoided that must be faced again in different form until you finally learn them. You meet the souls of those you were connected to in your previous life, recognizing them not in their physical forms, which have been discarded, but in their essential soul nature. And with these souls, you make agreements for future encounters, planning how you'll help each other grow, what roles you'll play in each other's next lives, when and where you'll meet, what karma between you needs to be worked through, what new karma you might create together for purposes of mutual development. The person who will be your spouse in your next life might have been your parent in the previous one, or your child, or your enemy, because souls need to experience all possible relationships with each other to develop complete understanding and empathy. The soul who wronged you in a previous life might agree to serve you in the next, not as punishment, but as balancing, as opportunity to transform the relationship from harm to help. The souls you most loved and who loved you might plan to meet you again in different roles, your mother becoming your daughter, your best friend becoming your sibling, the bonds continuing, but the forms changing to provide new perspectives and opportunities for growth. You work with specialized spiritual beings to design the blueprint for your next physical body, selecting genetic inheritance that will provide the physical instrument you need for the lessons you've chosen to learn. If you need to develop patience, you might choose a body prone to illness that will teach patience through suffering. If you need to learn humility, you might select a body that will face limitations or disabilities that prevent the pride you struggled with before. If you need to develop certain talents, you choose genetic and environmental factors that will support those capacities. You don't design every detail, but you establish the broad parameters, the general constitution and temperament, and predispositions that will create the conditions for your intended development. You survey potential parents, looking at which couples will be producing children around the time when cosmic and earthly conditions will be optimal for your incarnation, considering what each set of parents would provide in terms of heredity, family dynamics, cultural background, economic situation, and making your selection based on what will best serve your soul's needs. You choose the historical period when you'll incarnate, because certain lessons can only be learned in certain eras, certain karma can only be worked out when specific cultural and technological conditions exist. A soul that needs to develop technological mastery might choose to incarnate in the modern era. A soul that needs to experience a simpler, more direct relationship with nature might have chosen to incarnate in earlier agricultural periods. A soul that needs to learn about power and its corruption might choose to incarnate during times of empire or revolution. You select geographical location and cultural context because these provide different challenges and opportunities. Being born in a war zone teaches different lessons than being born in peaceful prosperity. Growing up in a spiritual culture provides different formation than materialistic environment. You choose the astrological moment of your birth, the configuration of planets at the moment when you'll take your first breath, because this configuration creates an energetic template, a cosmic imprint that shapes your temperament and the general trajectory of your life's possibilities. The duration of this devachanic period varies enormously depending on the soul's development level and the complexity of what must be prepared for the next incarnation. Younger souls might spend only a few decades or a century between lives, returning relatively quickly because their preparations are simpler, their karmic situations less complex. More developed souls might spend centuries or even a millennium between incarnations because they're involved in more elaborate preparations, working on broader scales of karmic resolution, participating in guidance of cultural evolution, preparing for incarnations that will serve not just their individual development, but collective human progress. The most advanced souls, those approaching the stage where reincarnation becomes optional rather than necessary, might remain in spiritual worlds for very long periods, incarnating only when specific historical moments require their contribution, taking physical form not because they need it for their own development, but because humanity needs what they can offer. Research on past life memories in children, particularly the systematic investigations by psychiatrist Ian Stevenson and his successors at the University of Virginia, has documented cases where young children, typically between ages 2 and 7, report detailed memories of previous lives, describing people and places they could not have learned about through normal means, and many of these memories have been verified through historical investigation. These cases often include children describing the period between lives, talking about when I was in heaven or when I was with the light, describing meetings with deceased relatives or spiritual beings, choosing their new parents, and planning their return to Earth. While this research doesn't prove all of Steiner's detailed observations about the between-life state, it provides independent confirmation that something beyond random chance or genetic inheritance is operating. The consciousness appears to continue between incarnations and retain some capacity for choice about the circumstances of rebirth. Now we penetrate to the heart of how the cycle operates, the principle that makes multiple lives necessary rather than optional, the law that ensures existence is fundamentally just, even when individual lifetimes appear grossly unfair. Karma, Steiner taught with rigorous precision based on direct spiritual observation, is not punishment or reward dispensed by cosmic judge, not fate or predestination that removes human freedom, but is the law of spiritual cause and effect, operating across multiple lifetimes, ensuring that every action generates consequences you must eventually experience, that every unbalanced relationship must be balanced, that every lesson avoided must be faced again until learned, that everything you set in motion must be completed, resolved, integrated into your soul's permanent development. Karma is the mechanism that makes moral learning possible, because without experiencing the consequences of your actions from all perspectives, you cannot truly understand why certain behaviors are harmful and others beneficial, cannot develop genuine compassion that requires knowing from inside what different experiences feel like. The operation of karma is both simpler and more complex than popular understanding suggests. The simple version If you cause suffering, you will experience similar suffering in a future life, not as divine revenge, but so you learn through direct experience why causing that suffering is contrary to spiritual evolution. If you help others, you will receive help when you need it, not as reward, but as natural consequence of having contributed to the web of mutual support. If you develop a capacity or talent through hard work and practice, you carry it forward, though it may manifest differently in different lives. If you fail to learn a lesson that life presents, similar circumstances will recur in your next incarnation until you finally understand what you were supposed to learn. If you wrong someone, creating karmic debt, you'll likely incarnate together again, possibly with reversed roles, the victim becoming the one with power and the perpetrator experiencing powerlessness, not as punishment, but as education, as balancing, as the soul learning all perspectives. But the complex reality is that karma operates on multiple levels simultaneously, creating intricate webs of cause and effect that span not just individual relationships, but entire groups, nations, even humanity as a whole. Every interaction creates karmic threads connecting you to other souls. Significant relationships, whether positive or negative, create bonds that draw you together across multiple lifetimes until the karma between you is fully resolved and transformed. Families are typically groups of souls who have been connected across many incarnations, working through karma with each other, sometimes helping, sometimes harming. Roles rotating, perspectives shifting, the whole family constellation serving as workshop for moral and spiritual development. Marriages often represent particularly intense karmic connections. Souls who need to work through deep patterns with each other, resolve old debts, or transform old conflicts. And this is why some marriages feel so destined, so inevitable. Why some people marry despite recognizing rationally that it's probably a mistake, because there's karmic work that needs to happen between those souls that can only occur through that union. Work relationships, friendships, even casual encounters that have significant impact, all of these create karma that shapes future lives. That teacher who saw your potential and encouraged you when you were ready to give up created karma of help that will likely result in you helping them in some form in a future life. The person you betrayed or cheated created karma of harm that will need to be balanced, likely through you experiencing similar betrayal or through opportunity to help them in a way that compensates for the previous harm. That stranger whose life you saved in an accident created karma of gratitude and connection that may draw you together in future lives. Every kindness and every cruelty, every moment of courage and every failure of nerve, every choice to help or to look away, all of this is recorded not in some external ledger, but in your own soul's substance, shaping who you are and what you'll experience as natural consequences of what you've set in motion. Collective karma also operates, connecting you not just to individuals, but to groups. Being born into a particular nation or ethnic group connects you to that group's collective karma, the consequences of that group's historical actions. If you incarnate as German in the generations after the Holocaust, you're working through Germany's collective karma, dealing with consequences of what was done, even if you personally weren't there. If you incarnate as American, you're connected to America's collective karma, both the positive contributions and the harms done through slavery, genocide of indigenous peoples, imperial wars. This isn't unfair because your soul chose this connection before birth, recognizing that working through collective karma serves your development, teaches lessons about responsibility and consequences that transcend individual actions. Research on inherited trauma, particularly studies by Rachel Yehuda and others on descendants of Holocaust survivors, shows that trauma effects can be transmitted across generations through epigenetic mechanisms, suggesting that collective karma may have biological as well as spiritual dimensions. Studies on social psychology of group identity and collective guilt show that people do feel responsibility for their group's actions even when they weren't personally involved, suggesting some recognition of collective karma even in secular frameworks. Historical patterns of former oppressors becoming oppressed and vice versa, colonizers later being colonized, suggest karmic balancing operating on national and cultural scales across historical time. The purpose of karma is not punishment but education, not retribution but development of consciousness through experiencing all perspectives, learning why certain actions serve evolution and others retard it not through being told, but through direct experience. This is why karma is actually compassionate rather than cruel, why it's expression of a cosmic justice rather than arbitrary suffering, because it ensures that eventually, across however many lifetimes it takes, every soul will learn what it needs to learn, and will develop the capacities it needs to develop, will transform from unconscious participation in harm to conscious participation in love and creation. And understanding karma transforms how you approach current life, because you recognize that your circumstances aren't punishment for unknown sins, but are curriculum you designed for yourself, that difficult people in your life are there by mutual agreement to work through karma together, that apparent injustices or balancing of accounts across lifetimes, that how you respond to what you're experiencing is creating the karma that will shape your future existence. Now, Steiner reveals perhaps the most personally meaningful aspect of the life cycle, that the people who matter most in your current existence, those who evoke the strongest feelings, whether love or hatred, attraction or repulsion, are almost certainly souls you've known before, relationships so deep that they transcend any single lifetime. Connections forged across dozens or even hundreds of incarnations, creating bonds that death cannot sever and that time cannot erase. That person you met and felt instant recognition with, as if you'd known them forever even though you just met, you probably have known them forever, your souls recognizing each other across the gap of forgetting that incarnation imposes. That family member you have inexplicable conflict with, despite all efforts at peace and understanding, you're likely working through karma from a previous life where the roles were different, the perpetrator and victim positions reversed, the relationship now providing opportunity to balance and transform what was left unresolved before. That soulmate connection that feels so destined, so inevitable, so much larger than just personal preference or compatible personalities, it probably is destiny, an agreement made in the spiritual worlds between your last life and this one, two souls who recognized that they could help each other grow, who saw that working through their karma together would serve both their developments, who chose to find each other again in this incarnation to continue and deepen work that has been ongoing across multiple lifetimes. This doesn't mean soulmate relationships are always easy or always succeed, because incarnation brings forgetting, bodies bring unconscious patterns, egos bring selfishness and defensiveness, and two people may have the deepest soul connection but still fail to work through their earthly issues effectively, creating more karma that will need to be addressed in future lives rather than resolving what they came together to resolve. Before birth, in the spiritual worlds during your devachanic sojourn, you made specific appointments with other souls about meeting at particular times in your upcoming life, because certain growth only happens through certain relationships, certain karma only resolves through specific encounters. These appointments are not rigid predestination because you retain free will, can ignore the pull towards someone you're meant to meet, can flee from a relationship that triggers your wounds even though that relationship was designed to heal them, can refuse to do the work that the encounter was meant to facilitate. But there are currents, there are synchronicities, there are mysterious arrangements that bring you into proximity with the souls you're meant to encounter, creating opportunities that you can recognize and act on or can miss through unconsciousness or fear. You arranged with a soul that will become your spouse to meet at specific time and place, though neither of you will consciously remember making that arrangement when you meet in the coffee shop or at the party or through the dating app, but something in you will recognize something in them, some resonance that goes deeper than surface attraction, some knowing that this person matters in ways you can't rationally explain. You agreed with someone who will become your closest friend to cross paths at a particular phase of life, when you'll both be ready for the depth of connection you'll provide each other. You planned with a soul that owes you karmic debt to enter your life at a moment when circumstances align so that debt can be repaid through the help they'll provide, the door they'll open, the support they'll offer exactly when you need it most. You scheduled conflicts with souls you wronged in previous lives, difficult people who will trigger your worst qualities, force you to face your shadow, provide the friction necessary for growth that comfort never catalyzes. The mechanics of how these encounters actually manifest involve what Carl Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that suggest intelligence operating beyond random chance. You happen to take a different route home and run into someone you haven't seen in years who mentions a job opening that perfectly matches your skills. You cancel plans at the last minute and end up at an event where you meet someone who will change your life's direction. You pick up a book randomly and find in it the exact answer to a question you've been struggling with. These aren't random luck, but are karmic appointments manifesting, souls you're meant to encounter being brought into your orbit through the mysterious choreography planned before birth but executed through the seemingly random events of ordinary life. Research on small world phenomena, the discovery that any two people on Earth are connected through surprisingly short chains of acquaintance, provides some mathematical framework for understanding how encounters get orchestrated. Studies on social network theory show that a few key connectors create the hubs through which most people meet, suggesting that souls planning encounters before birth might position themselves at these hubs. Research on timing and life events shows that certain transitions, like starting college or changing jobs or moving to a new city, dramatically increase likelihood of significant new relationships forming, suggesting these transitions might be chosen before birth as optimal moments for planned encounters to occur. Studies on attraction and attachment show that instant connections often correlate with similar trauma histories or complementary patterns, which could be interpreted as souls recognizing karmic resonance even when conscious mind doesn't understand what it's responding to, Understanding that your significant relationships are not accidental, but are karmic reunions, transforms how you approach them. That difficult parent or sibling isn't just bad luck of genetic lottery, but is soul you have history with, karma to work through, opportunity to heal old wounds and create new patterns. That person who betrayed you may be someone you betrayed in previous life, the karma now balancing, the roles reversed, and your response to this betrayal, whether you choose forgiveness or revenge, creates karma that will affect your next encounter with this soul. That stranger who helps you in crisis may be repaying debt from when you helped them before, or maybe creating new positive karma that will connect you in future lives. Every relationship becomes sacred when you recognize it as continuation of soul-level connection, as opportunity to evolve together, as part of a vast pattern of mutual development, spanning far more than this single lifetime. Now we arrive at the ultimate question that gives meaning to the entire cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Why? Why do we incarnate repeatedly, moving through this endless round of entering bodies, living lives, dying, dwelling in spiritual worlds, and returning again to physical form? What is the point of this vast cosmic curriculum? Steiner's answer is simultaneously simple and profound. Consciousness evolution, the gradual development of individual spiritual awareness from dim participation. In group consciousness, where souls are barely differentiated from one another, toward fully self-aware individuality capable of consciously choosing love, truth, and creative participation in cosmic evolution, rather than just reacting instinctively or following biological and social programming. Each lifetime provides experiences that slowly, incrementally build capacities that couldn't develop any other way, transforming you over dozens or hundreds of incarnations from unconscious fragment of collective soul into conscious spiritual individual, developing the moral intuition, creative capacity, and selfless love that are the goals of human evolution. Physical incarnation in dense matter forces you to become individual in ways that wouldn't happen in purely spiritual existence, where souls remain more merged, less differentiated. Being limited by a body, separated from others by the boundaries of your physical form, cut off from direct soul-to-soul communication by the barriers that matter creates, all of this suffering of separation is actually serving developmental purpose, forcing each soul to develop independent consciousness, autonomous will, capacity for self-reflection that doesn't exist in the merged awareness of group soul. Suffering teaches compassion that can't be learned from books or lectures or philosophical discussions, because only by experiencing pain yourself can you truly understand and care about others' pain in ways that go beyond abstract sympathy to genuine empathy rooted in shared experience. Limitation develops creativity and problem solving, because if you had unlimited power and unlimited resources, you would never need to develop ingenuity, never need to work around obstacles, never need to transform constraints into opportunities. The frustration of having great visions but limited means to manifest them forces development of practical intelligence, of ability to work with what you have rather than waiting for ideal conditions. Relationships teach love beyond biological instinct, beyond need and attachment and desire, gradually refining through many lifetimes from purely selfish wanting to have your needs met, to mutual exchange where you give in order to receive, to genuine care for another's well-being independent of what they do for you, eventually to truly selfless love that serves others' growth even when it costs you, that celebrates their freedom even when you'd prefer they stay close, that lets go when holding on would be easier. Challenges build strength and wisdom and character in ways that easy life never could, because comfort produces complacency. Success breeds arrogance, and only failure and loss and difficulty humble you enough to recognize your limitations, force you to develop resilience and persistence and courage. Mistakes teach discernment as you experience the consequences of poor choices across lifetimes, gradually developing moral intuition that perceives directly what serves evolution and what doesn't, what brings genuine fulfillment and what provides only temporary gratification followed by suffering. Over dozens or hundreds of lifetimes experiencing every conceivable human circumstance, playing every possible role from beggar to king, from victim to perpetrator, from student to teacher, from child to parent, the soul gradually accumulates wisdom that transforms unconscious existence into conscious participation in your own development, and eventually in cosmic development itself. The progression of soul development that Steiner observed follows general pattern, though individual variations are infinite. Younger souls, incarnating for the first time, or relatively few times, are primarily focused on physical and instinctual life, learning basic lessons about cause and effect, action and consequence, pleasure and pain, not yet capable of much abstract thinking or moral subtlety, operating primarily from self-interest and biological drives. As souls mature through more incarnations, they develop emotional sophistication, capacity for relationships beyond just using others for personal needs, beginning of recognition that there might be something beyond material existence. More developed souls begin to question, to seek meaning, to develop intellectual and artistic capacities, to grapple with moral and philosophical issues, to recognize their actions have consequences beyond immediate effects. Highly developed souls are focused primarily on spiritual development, have largely worked through grosser karmic debts, are capable of genuine compassion and wisdom, often incarnate specifically to serve collective evolution rather than just their own growth. The ultimate goal of this evolution, according to Steiner's vision based on his perception of humanity's spiritual trajectory, is transformation of humanity from beings who are spiritual but unconscious of it to beings who are consciously spiritual, from passive recipients of divine impulses to active creative participants in cosmic evolution, from children who must be guided by higher beings to mature individuals capable of making conscious moral choices based on direct spiritual perception, rather than external rules. This transformation requires time, requires experience, requires the full cycle of incarnations, providing every possible perspective and experience until the soul has genuinely become wise through lived understanding, rather than just accumulated information. And beyond individual evolution, there is collective evolution, humanity as a whole moving through historical epochs that Steiner mapped in detail, each epoch developing different capacities, each contributing to the overall goal of conscious spiritual humanity capable of creative participation in the ongoing evolution of cosmos itself. We arrive now at the final teaching, both invitation and warning. While most people live in complete amnesia about their past lives, believing they started at birth with no prior history, this forgetting is not permanent necessity, but is protective mechanism preventing you from being overwhelmed by memories before you're strong enough to integrate them. But as you develop spiritually, as you do the inner work that Steiner outlined in his Path of Initiation, fragments of past life memory can begin to surface, not as entertainment or ego inflation, but as genuine self-knowledge that helps you understand your current life's challenges and purposes, see the patterns connecting your incarnations, recognize the thread of continuity running through a parent sequence of separate lives. That inexplicable talent that seems to come from nowhere, that child who plays piano at age 4 without being taught, that adult who picks up complex skill with ease that others struggle for years to develop, these make sense when you remember developing those capacities across multiple lifetimes, the muscle memory and neural pathways built in previous bodies carrying forward into new incarnation. That phobia that therapy can't trace to any childhood trauma, the terror of water or heights or fire or closed spaces that seems completely irrational based on this life's experiences, these make sense when you recall the traumatic deaths that caused them, the drowning or falling or burning that imprinted such terror that even new body carries the fear. That instant antipathy to someone you just met, the dislike that has no rational basis in their behavior toward you, makes sense when you remember what they did to you in previous existence, or what you did to them, the soul recognizing karmic enemy, even when conscious mind doesn't understand the reaction. That sense of having been somewhere before, even though you've never visited that place in this life, that feeling of déjà vu that's stronger than just neural misfiring, that recognition of building or landscape or culture that feels like coming home, these can be actual memories breaking through the forgetting, your soul recognizing where it lived before. Those dreams that feel more real than ordinary dreams, that have quality of memory rather than fantasy, that show you in different body, in different time period with different people, but with sense of being yourself, these may be not imagination, but actual recall of previous incarnations surfacing through the dream state when the conscious mind's filters are less active. Those children who spontaneously talk about when I lived before, or describe in detail people and places they couldn't have learned about through ordinary means, these are souls whose forgetting hasn't yet become complete, who still remember their previous existence before the amnesia that incarnation imposes fully takes hold. Steiner taught specific exercises for safely accessing past life memories, but he warned repeatedly that seeking these memories prematurely, before adequate moral and psychological development, creates more problems than it solves. If you remember being powerful ruler or famous artist but haven't developed humility in this life, the memory feeds ego inflation rather than genuine self-knowledge. If you remember being victim of terrible atrocity but haven't developed capacity to forgive, the memory feeds resentment and desire for revenge. If you remember a relationship with someone in current life but see that you betrayed them before, the knowledge creates guilt or awkwardness that damages current relationship rather than helping heal it. The memories need to come at right time, when you're mature enough to use them for growth rather than for ego purposes, when you can integrate them without being destabilized, when they serve your development rather than just satisfying curiosity. The point of past life memory is not to accumulate interesting stories about who you were, not to impress others with your previous incarnations, not to explain away current difficulties by blaming them on past trauma, but to understand the pattern, to see the continuity, to recognize the lessons you've been working on across lifetimes, to understand why you chose your current circumstances, to see what karma you're here to resolve, to gain perspective that this one life is just chapter in much longer story. That current challenges are temporary, though the capacities you develop through facing them are permanent. That death is not ending, but transition to next phase of vast cycle that continues until you've developed fully into the conscious spiritual being you're meant to become. Research on past life memories in children, particularly Ian Stevenson's 40 years of systematic investigation, provides strong evidence that some form of carryover occurs between lives. His database of over 3,000 documented cases includes children who describe specific details about previous lives, names of people and places they couldn't have learned through normal means, often speaking languages they'd never been exposed to, showing skills they'd never been taught, having birthmarks corresponding to wounds that killed them in previous life. And in many cases, these details were verified through historical investigation, confirming that the child was describing real, person who lived and died in ways matching the child's account. While this research doesn't prove all of Steiner's teachings about reincarnation, it provides independent scientific validation that consciousness appears to continue between incarnations and retain some memories that surface in new bodies. The invitation is to approach your life with this understanding, recognizing that you're eternal being on vast journey of development, that this current existence is precisely what your soul needs right now, even if your ego doesn't like it, that the people in your life are not accidents, but are souls you have history with and karma to work through, that your talents and challenges both serve your evolution, that death is not ending but transition, that you'll return again and again until the work is complete, until you've developed into conscious spiritual individual capable of creative participation in cosmic evolution. And the warning is not to use this teaching as escape from present responsibility, not to dismiss current difficulties by saying it's just karma without doing the work to transform, not to wait for future lives, to develop capacities you could develop now, not to seek past life memories for ego gratification, but to live this life fully, consciously, recognizing it as sacred opportunity, as curriculum designed by your own higher self for your development, as temporary but crucial stage in vast cycle that continues long before and long after this single span between birth and death that most people mistake for the totality of existence.